Yeah.
Where's Grot? Where's Grot?
Okay, so welcome to our data meeting today. I appreciate you guys taking the time and the effort to come in. This is just a second meeting after the meeting that we already had to decide what data we were going to look at, so thank you guys for helping out with that first one. What we're going to do today is we're going to kind of take a look at some data and look a little bit more in depth with the data itself to see if we can come up with some real assumptions on what the data looks like and what we can do with the data as we move forward. What I want to start with today is just some norms. And for you guys, we've already talked about norms. Norms are really ideas about how a meeting should be run. And what it does is it prevents us from wasting time, so that when we actually do sit down and look at norms, norms allow us to stay on task and to get as much out of the meeting as we possibly can and to get out of here as soon as possible as well. So I've given you a list of norms: respect everyone's time by starting and ending on time, only one conversation at a time, capture off-topic items in a back burner and agree to discuss them later, be present with people you're meeting with, so put cell phones away and other information that may take you off task. Everyone is responsible for helping to stay on topic, and if you think we're getting off topic, don't be afraid to speak up and say, hey, we need to come back together. This one I thought was interesting. Elmo, enough, let's move on. And real simple, a task manager, if it gets out of control, can say, hey, Elmo, and everybody realizes, okay, we're off task, let's get back to it. And everybody's responsible for upholding norms. So hopefully this is going to help us out a little bit, be able to run through the meeting as effectively and efficiently as possible. The purpose of the meeting today is we're going to make some predictions about some data that we're going to take a look at to hopefully engage you guys and stimulate a little curiosity. And then we're going to go through some assumptions. We're going to look at some of your own biases that you may have and try to get those biases out in the open so they don't affect the interpretation of how we look at the data itself. So everybody has a note card in front of them. Everybody has a writing utensil. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do is not to show anybody else. We're not talking about it. But I want you to look at the information on this data table right here. And I want you to make a prediction. Living environment, percent of students receiving an 85 or higher on the Regents exam. And this is here in Forest Heads High School over a 3-year period. In Earth Science, percent of students receiving an 85 or higher. So it's a prediction. There's no right or wrong answer. So take 30 seconds or so and write down your number for each of those, and then flip your note card over, please.
Each year. So you need.
So just an average.
Oh.
So one number is an average. What do you think? What percent of students got an 85 or higher in living environment over the last 3 years test? And the same thing for Earth Science. It's funny because everyone's sitting down right now and I'm estimating too high, I'm estimating too low, what the real numbers look like. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea of how we're going to go through the protocol of the meeting. We're going to sit down like we've already done and make some predictions to try and engage you guys with a little curiosity. And then after that, we're going to go ahead and make some assumptions, and I'm going to ask for a recorder. Mel, would you be the recorder? You want to be the recorder first? No?
Mel can grab right back. You are.
Mary's going to be the recorder for us.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Mark, could you do me a favor and use your cell phone as a timer for us to keep track? And Terry, could you be the task manager for us? So if we get off track, elbow real quick is a way to get us back on track if we're not talking about the topics at hand. So what I'd like you guys to do next is to sit down and look at the information up here and see if you can come up with some assumptions as to why you think the data may show the numbers here for passing students up here for these students, and kind of get an idea of what you think the assumptions might be based on this information. So flip your card over, decide that it doesn't have the numbers on it, please. And we're going to take a couple minutes right now just so you guys can write down some assumptions. And with the assumptions, be specific. So if you give a reason, explain why. Maybe there's too many students that are in the school that have free and reduced lunch. A specific may be that we're in a situation in the school where we have a lot of kids that are English language learners. So take a look at the data up here. Percent of living environment students receiving an 85 or higher, and percent of earth science students receiving an 85 or higher.
Take a look at the data, where's the data?
The data is what you estimated
Oh.
on your sheet, what you thought the percentage was.
So
So
how
make
much
some
do you
assumptions why you think those numbers are what they are. For example, I may say that living environment students have higher mastery rates because we give living environments 10th grade. Okay, that could specifically be an assumption that I'm making right here. I mean, and it's tough because some of your assumptions, maybe not negative, but maybe are honest answers which people may not like. And that's why some of these assumptions to get out of the way right now would help us. What's that?
Is it supposed to be timing anything?
Timing right now, 3 minutes, please.
And I'm gonna write later. We're gonna share out.
Yep. So again, you're looking at this based on what you think your numbers are. Maybe you think your numbers for living environment are higher and earth science is lower, or vice versa. So what's some reasoning? The real tough stuff is when you talk about something based on somebody's a good teacher, stuff you don't want to talk about, but those could be assumptions that our teaching group at one level is stronger or weaker. And when you look at data, sometimes to get those assumptions out of the way, it's difficult to do, but sometimes it helps you better understand data if you talk about some of those biases walking in. So Mark, it was 3 minutes. I probably started you about a minute late. So we'll end that maybe a minute early on that timer since I didn't have you started right away. So Mary, if you could, we're going to go ahead and let everybody take the predictions. So if you want to put the environment studies there, we can put the numbers down, and then we'll get for everybody's assumptions to take. So Sue, do you want to start with your predictions for your numbers for living environment and science?
I said 40 for both. You want my assumptions too?
Not yet, we'll just do the predictions first.
I got 40 and 30.
I said 60 and 60.
Is that 60 and
45 and 30.
Mary, do you remember yours?
Yeah. I said 50 and 45.
Okay, so I had you make some assumptions based on what you had individually on your card. What I'd like you to do is just take one more minute and take a look at the numbers that everybody's put up there and see if that changes or adds to an assumption for yourself right now. Maybe it doesn't change anything for you, but maybe looking at other people's numbers, you're like, oh, well, a lot of people are saying that one is greater than the other, so here's another assumption. It's not a real big spread, quite honestly. Those estimations and predictions are actually pretty close. Okay, Mary, do you want to start with your first assumption, and then we'll just go round robin until we exhaust them? Mark, could you do me a favor and set the timer for 5 minutes, please?
I based my number basically on my own. Mine are about, I had about 40% that had that score. And then just kind of knowing my other colleagues in my department, where we all stand. So I just assumed it was going to be a little higher than my own.
Okay.
This, I chose that because I really don't know much about it. They're older kids. I think the content's a little easier, but I might get
Okay.
spanked for that.
So if we can write that down up there, assumption, living environment higher because of older kids. So if you have the same answer as what's going up here, you just skip past it and you can go to your second or third answer if you have those until we exhaust all the answers. Okay, thank you. Sue?
I think, one of mine was just that most students will fall in the average range. so that was my assumption, that most would fall in the average range, so I thought there would be a lower number in the highest range.
So do you have a reason that you think backs that up? Why they end up in the average range?
Just natural curve.
Okay. So most kids fall in the average range because of the natural curve? No?
I assume the test is easier for living environments, and
Okay.
that's because everybody has to pass it.
Gotcha. Assume living environment test easier.
And can I, so like the first one,
Uh-huh.
I put not only the living in, like the earth science kids are new to high school, so sort of along those, and there's like.
Sure, so we can make that as another assumption
I
too,
was
right
gonna
there.
put on that first
Yeah,
one.
earth science lower, first year high school students,
In the
absolutely.
transition,
Yeah. Mark?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of where mine fit in, because I kind of said the rigor of the tests, living environment versus earth science, just because of the content and the kids' ability to grasp stuff differently.
So rigor higher in which? do you
Yeah,
think?
see, I don't know if that's the right word, though, I'm just thinking, because I'm looking at this and I'm thinking along that line, I think the kids struggle with the earth science a little bit, because it is their first year, it is different, and like
A little
we've
more
said for
abstract,
years, a
maybe.
little more abstract, and, you know, earth science should maybe not be the first thing they're getting, because the different concepts they struggle with.
So maybe
Should just
ES
concept.
lower, more abstract concepts? Is that summarize?
Yeah, I think that's good, and then, yeah, I said, let's see, because I said something about student work ethic typically better as the students get older, sophomore versus freshman. And big thing for me, I always go back to parent involvement. Just parents being involved at home can lead to either more or less academic achievement,
Right.
whether or not you got more or less parent involvement. I got kids who I know are not high-level thinkers, but the parents are all over them at home, and they succeed because the parents help push them.
Is this parent involvement
Is that for both
related
tests?
to either?
Yeah, it would be
Yeah,
for both,
either,
either or.
okay, for both.
I mean, just
Yeah.
student achievement based on whether or not you got the parents backing them up.
Okay, thank you. Eddie?
I had also the ninth grade adjustment, so you need to put that up there.
Right, so
again
then-
to
okay.
account for the disparity between the LE and the ES. And then it looks like I'm as high as anybody on almost all of those but one, and I think that, I was just thinking the ineligible students not taking the exam would be a little bit of a boost in the percentage, because those are probably kids that don't work as hard, not as
Okay.
motivated.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
basically-
without ineligibles might boost mastery?
To kind of piggyback on that, like earth science kind of weeds out those, that bottom, you know, set of kids because they either don't make a lab requirement or they didn't pass, and so living environment, there's always a weeding out every time you go up
Right.
another level, so I said it kind of piggybacks on that, and just saying.
So the living environment might be
It's
higher
higher.
because earth science weeds out some of those. So I think
Right,
we've
right.
covered that one a little bit.
Um,
Anybody have anything else they see?
Well, the other
Terry?
thing, after you said, okay, now that you see everybody else's numbers, do you adjust or add another assumption? So I noticed mine were on the lower end, and it's because I teach chemistry, and so we have a negative curve around that 85%, whereas living environment has a favorable curve.
Right.
So I stayed a little bit on the lower side, just based on my experience with chemistry.
Okay.
So I don't think the curve was mentioned if they're all.
Yeah, so I think
It's
the
also based
assumption
on my
is living
experience.
environment curve is favorable for high mastery, which I think we've talked about before, it definitely could be the case with the way that curve is set up.
I also-
Thank you very much.
I also have the fact that living environment doesn't have a reference table, so kids maybe earth science have to be able to use that
Stand, boss.
reference table.
Okay, great, yep, perfect, living environment does not have a reference table, so that may help as well. Mark, thank you for keeping us on track with time. So what I want to do now is I want to show you the numbers and give you an idea. I actually looked at the school report cards for course sets for the last 3 years for both living environment and for earth science, and took a look at the mastery rates. And this is what you look at for mastery rates.
Dang, I suck as a
Are
chemistry
you
teacher.
sure mastery you were looking at, or just
It's
pass?
just passing, I know,
Because on the
right?
spreadsheet that we do at the end of
Right.
each year, they're not like that.
You know what? I have to correct this. That was a 65 or higher. It's a 54 and a 48.
That would have changed my
Yep.
numbers.
Sorry, I put the wrong numbers up there. It's a 54 and a 48.
Got it.
Okay? So
Okay.
I put, sorry about that, I put the 65 or higher up there. So
So that's
54,
what?
That's 65 or higher.
yeah,
Yeah.
54
Okay.
and a
Phew.
48. Yeah.
So 54.
I accidentally put the wrong numbers in. There's a learning experience
All right.
right there.
So wait, so now we're looking at, okay, yeah.
54 and
So
what's the other one?
54 here for living
48,
environment
okay.
and 48 here for
That was
earth science. I
really-
apologize about that.
Passing
Kinda
ratios.
The
goes
funny thing
along.
is, I must have checked
I
through
knew.
this like 4 times, right, to see if it was correct.
Wow, okay, 54%, all right. So what did I do? Ooh,
I mean,
I was
we weren't
close.
too far off with numbers to take a look at it. So it gives you an idea right now when we take a look at it that there is a difference, and we have some assumptions or biases why we think those differences may have occurred. So the second part of the meeting, what we want to do is we want to delve a little bit deeper into the data itself. Right now, we just looked at a prediction, we looked at some of our assumptions and biases, and now we actually want to look at the data in a different way by me giving you some more information so we can actually study some facts about the data itself. So, sorry, 58 and 45.
Oh, 58, 45. How did I get those mixed up?
I can stop you did. That was my mistake. 45. So what I'd like you to do is on the note card as well, I'd like you to take a look at the extra data that I've given you now. And what I'd like you to do is write down some information about this data, some factual information that you take a look at. Be specific with numbers, with percentages, with differences. So Mark, if you could set the timer for 5 minutes for us, please. I'm going to have you guys simply write down facts that you see from the data I've given you and then the extra data I've added to this slide right here.
So not what our assumptions are based on the data.
Not assumptions, just straight factual, you know, 58% passing in is 13 points higher than. So specific factual information only. I also have a hard copy of this information for you guys. In a second, we're going to take the PowerPoint slide off of there. So you'll still have this data in front of you to use as a reference as we work through this data, looking at it a couple different ways. Again, if you take a look, this is New York State's average over the last 3 years, and then Forsyth's average over the last 3 years. And again, this is for mastery, 85% or higher. Don't be afraid to go any direction, because everybody might be going different directions, that's fine. Again, specific numbers are important here. Differences, percentages, only factual information. Sue, would you be willing to be the recorder for the second half of this exercise? So everybody has a copy of this in front of them now. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit the no-show button on this. Take the overhead up. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at this data in 3 separate ways. We're gonna look at the data, here's what, which is our factual information, specific numbers and ideas. We're gonna look at the data on so what surprised you about the data? Are there any patterns that we see? Do you have any other questions, other information you think might have been helpful? And then the last part is now what? What do we do with the data? What are our inferences? What are our conclusions? What are our next steps? And hopefully by going through this process, this will help us out to determine what we're gonna do at the next meeting. Okay? Mark, how much time do we have?
A minute and a half.
Does anybody need more time on this, or are we all set? Okay, so why don't we go ahead and let's go through some of the factual information that we saw on this data table right here. Terry, you want to start first on this one?
So, you pointed out some of them, like Horseheads versus New York State, the grade levels are different. Horseheads.
Okay, grade levels are different.
Example, living environment is only 10th grade, but in New York State, it could be 9th or 10th, when you look at the bigger picture. Can we just do one?
Okay. Yep, so Horseheads versus New York State.
So we're the ones that
So
are
Horseheads
9.
9 is ES.
So for Ursuline,
Well, there was supposed to be 9 and 10, it said,
Yeah.
for New York State.
So we take Horseheads 9, 10 is living environment for Horseheads.
Yeah, there you go.
And then for New York State, 9 or 10
Oh,
for
For
Iowa.
both of them,
For
yeah.
Iowa.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's definitely factual information on there, that's a difference.
Mhm.
Ed, do you see any other factual information there?
I just focused on the 30% because it was the same. And, basically said that 30% seems to represent the higher level, percentage of higher level kids regardless of.
In the New York State one? Okay, so New York State, 30% for both earth science and living environment. I think it was 30 and 31, but 31's pretty darn close when you take a look at
Close
it.
enough to government work.
And again, sometimes it's tough to look at it this way, because when you only look at the facts, you're taking the bias and assumptions totally out of it. Sometimes it's difficult to separate that. Mark?
I was just kind of looking at the fact that we were 28 points higher for living environment and 14 points higher for earth science
Okay, so
compared to the state
Horseheads,
for mastery.
28% higher.
28% higher mastery for living environment and 14% higher for earth science. So I thought that was interesting. that,
14% higher. Yeah, I mean, that definitely bodes well for what we're doing here compared to the state, right? Mel?
I noticed the plus or minus, so New York State is only plus or minus 1, whereas Horseheads is plus or minus 13. So much bigger.
Yeah, and actually, New York State was earth science plus 1.
Oh, yeah, so Earth Science was plus or minus.
Yeah, and so New York State was plus 1 ES, so the
Oh.
scores were higher in earth science. But when we looked at Horseheads, the plus 13 was 13 higher for living environment.
Got it.
Yeah. So like Ed said, it looks like both the passing, or the mastery percentages in the state were pretty close, but in Horseheads, there's a little bit of disparity.
I'm sorry, I thought that was like a plus or minus, it was giving you a range of values.
Mary?
You guys got everything I was gonna talk about. I
Well, that's
saw
all
the same
right.
things. I
Yeah.
don't see anything else.
Sue, did you have something different from what's
I
up
think
there?
that's the same as mine.
In looking at the data, there's only so much factual information you can see from it.
Yeah, well, I said overall, we are higher than New York State, but that's okay.
Okay, great. Does anybody have anything else that they see as factual information for here's what that we don't already have down?
Oh, I guess
Mary?
maybe I could come up with something. Just look at the number of, with statistics, the number of pieces of data. New York State is a much greater number.
So your sample size in New York
Right,
State is
sample
much
size is
greater.
so much
Okay,
more.
yeah, that's a great point to take a look at.
Where's the sample size shown to you?
It's not. You
It's
gotta
not on
assume-
here, but
You gotta
assume.
know that New York
Assume.
State
Okay.
is infinitely.
Right,
bigger.
right, yeah.
In the actual data that I did look at, it did show me sample size. I mean, you're talking like 800,000 kids in the state. And here you're talking like 800 to 900 kids over a 3-year average. So that sample size,
And it's the same
Yep.
3-year average. That's a
Right.
fact.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, Sue, thank you very much. Mel, could you do so what for us for recorder up here, please? But before you do that, what I'd like you guys to do is something a little bit different. I'm gonna have you do a partner share, so Terry and Mel, if you guys could get together at one table, that would be great. The so what is a little bit different. What about the data surprised you? Are there any patterns you see, or are there any other questions or information that you have? For example, this one right here, even though we kind of made an assumption that it's higher, and I did look at the numbers, I didn't have it included, that could also be, what other questions could you ask? What are the sample sizes? So I'd like you to take a minute or two, come up with one or two, and then share with your partner. Mike, could you set that for 5 minutes again, please?
Yes, they just pulled out that section.
I guess that's surprising.
So then, why this discrepancy?
Right, so that's what the question is needed, is
Now,
they need to break it down to New York State, we should break down maybe by school, so like, you
so
use
say
this many
economics,
percent, we can do something this year, or even, yeah, yeah.
There's a big difference between the two subjects, I think, two very different subjects, two different papers. It's just like a pattern. I would consider. But it's funny because it's reversed.
Right, I'd like to see what.
Yeah, and this is wide open, guys. There's so many directions you can go.
I had questions. Right. Yeah, I would assume kids would.
I was just like,
But that's an assumption too.
Yeah, and that's tough. And that's the biggest reason I wanted to take a look at this data, because so many schools in New York State do it so different. What's the right way? Who knows what the right way is?
Or if some could take earth science, some freshmen and some freshmen take bio, and then the following year they switch and then track those numbers and see if they still
Yeah.
fall out that way.
What I'd like to do next is take a look and find a district similar to ours that does it the opposite way, and see what the data might look like. But maybe that's something that we talk about for the when we get to that point. What's some of the next steps that we can look at?
Don't even some school districts have one or the other at the middle school level?
Yep. Yep. And that's definitely another question that we could look at, what effect does that have when kids take either one of these in 8th grade? Absolutely.
Nice to get out so many. Yeah, I wonder.
Mark, what do we have for time?
2.5.
We have plenty of time, guys.
Summer program,
Does it help a little bit to talk to somebody about your thoughts? Does it give you some more ideas that maybe support your own opinions a little bit better when you talk to somebody else? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I think that communication with other people oftentimes opens up my mind, or maybe I didn't see something before. So I discussed it with someone and they said, well, what if? And then you respond, well, I never thought about it that way. So I think that sharing sometimes helps a little bit too when we're in these data meetings. Mel, could you be the recorder for us? So now we're going to take a look at the next step. So what? What are some patterns? What are some questions? What are some things that surprised you? We already talked about one a little bit when we mentioned that I did not have sample size on the information I gave you. We kind of made an assumption that sample size is bigger, and then I told you, yes, sample size in New York State was larger. So what? That was one of the things we took a look at was sample size. We're looking at New York State obviously being the bigger sample size. What other questions, ideas, or patterns do you have? I'll let you guys just kind of raise your hand and go ahead and Mary?
Our district compared to the rest of the state has a higher socioeconomic status, which is going to filter down to a lot of variables.
Right.
White collar workers versus blue collar workers, the education level of
Right.
parents, and that's going to drive